Good evening, and thank you for joining us for tonight's in-depth special report. Over the past several weeks, tensions between the United States and Iran have escalated into a major geopolitical crisis with implications that extend far beyond the Middle East. What began as rising diplomatic friction has now moved into a complex confrontation involving military actions, economic disruption, and growing global concern. Analysts and world leaders alike are watching closely as events continue to unfold. The conflict reached a new level of intensity when airstrike operations targeted strategic Iranian military infrastructure. These strikes were aimed at degrading Iran's missile capabilities and defense systems. In response, Iran launched a series of retaliatory missile and drone attacks against U.S. military positions, Israeli interests, and allied forces stationed across the region. These exchanges have caused casualties among both military personnel and civilians, and have raised questions about how far the confrontation could spread. One of the most critical components of this crisis centers around the Strait of Hormuz, a narrow but vital waterway through which approximately 20% of the world's oil supply passes each day. Because of repeated threats and attacks, shipping traffic in the strait has dropped sharply. This has sent shockwaves through global energy markets, driving crude oil prices above $100 per barrel and sparking concerns about long-term implications for global supply. Economists warn that sustained disruptions to energy transit routes could result in higher fuel prices, inflationary pressure, and economic instability in markets around the world, including the United States. The effects of the conflict are also evident in the economies of nations heavily dependent on energy imports and exports. Global financial markets have reacted to the uncertainty, with key stock indices experiencing volatility. Investors seeking refuge from geopolitical risk are turning to traditional safe haven assets such as gold and government bonds. Meanwhile, insurance firms that cover maritime and energy infrastructure have raised risk premiums, reflecting fears over extended instability and potential damage to critical facilities. Neighboring countries in the Gulf region have not been immune. In Bahrain, a drone strike reportedly struck fuel storage facilities near the international airport, causing significant fires and underscoring the vulnerability of civilian infrastructure in conflict zones. In Lebanon, repeated airstrikes have led to tragic humanitarian consequences, with children among the casualties. International aid organizations are sounding the alarm, emphasizing the urgent need for humanitarian assistance as displacement figures rise and civilian needs grow more acute. Diplomatic efforts have been underway to de-escalate tensions and open channels of communication. The United Nations Security Council convened special sessions to address the crisis, urging restraint and calling for an immediate ceasefire. European leaders, including officials from France and Germany, have stressed the importance of diplomatic engagement and have appealed for dialogue between all parties involved. Despite these efforts, formal negotiations between the United States and Iran have made limited progress, and tensions remain high. At the international level, the global community is divided in its response. Some nations have voiced support for the U.S. approach, emphasizing the need to counter threats and maintain regional security. Others have criticized the escalation, arguing that the use of force may only deepen hostilities and complicate efforts to achieve a peaceful resolution. The international debate underscores the complexity of the situation and the difficulty of forging a unified strategy for peace. Within the United States, public opinion reflects a range of perspectives. Large demonstrations have taken place in major cities, with some individuals calling for continued military pressure and others urging restraint and a shift toward diplomatic solutions. Advocacy groups on both sides of the issue have used social media and public forums to mobilize support, making the conflict a topic of intense national discussion. Military analysts caution that both the United States and Iran possess significant capabilities, and that even minor miscalculations could have serious consequences. The potential for miscommunication or unintended escalation remains a significant concern. Experts emphasize the need for clear communication and strategic planning to prevent further deterioration of the situation. The humanitarian crisis continues to compound, with millions of civilians forced to flee their homes in search of safety. Reports from aid organizations indicate that infrastructure damage, shortages of basic necessities, and restricted access to relief efforts are exacerbating the plight of displaced populations. Global organizations, including the Red Cross and United Nations agencies, have issued urgent appeals for support, highlighting the growing urgency of the situation. Energy markets remain highly sensitive to developments on the ground. Traders and analysts are monitoring the strait and surrounding regions for signs of further disruption. Some reports suggest that alternative energy routes are being explored by oil producers to reduce dependency on the Strait of Hormuz, though such measures may prove costly and logistically complex. Economic repercussions have also reached financial markets. Equity indices have shown increased volatility as investors weigh the implications of extended conflict. Currency markets have reflected similar instability, with safe haven currencies gaining strength amid risk-off trading behavior. Central banks in many countries are closely watching financial conditions and assessing the potential need for policy adjustments in response to prolonged geopolitical risk. At the diplomatic front, global powers are pushing for renewed negotiations. Both China and Russia have called for restraint, emphasizing the need to uphold international law and prioritize peaceful conflict resolution. However, claims about foreign involvement in intelligence sharing and military cooperation have emerged in unofficial reports, raising further questions about the broader geopolitical implications of this crisis. The humanitarian dimension remains at the forefront of global concern. Human rights organizations are calling for the protection of civilians and respect for international humanitarian law. Access to hospitals, shelters, and essential services continues to be a major challenge in affected areas, underscoring the urgency of a ceasefire and humanitarian corridors. As the crisis continues to unfold, analysts are looking at multiple possible outcomes. Some warn that further escalation could draw additional regional actors into the conflict, potentially destabilizing the Middle East even further. Others note that successful diplomacy, backed by international pressure and sustained negotiation, could pave the way for de-escalation and eventual conflict resolution. For millions of people living in the affected regions, the hope is that diplomatic efforts will prevail and that tensions will gradually decrease. Public sentiment around the world reflects a desire for peace and stability, even as political divisions persist. In the coming days, decisions made by leaders will likely determine the direction of this crisis. The world remains on edge, watching how events unfold and hoping for solutions that prioritize safety, security, and long-term stability. Thank you for joining us for this special report. We will continue to bring you the latest updates and analysis from experts around the world as this story develops.